They said I was worthless. My mother-in-law whispered it loud enough so I could hear. "She's nothing without my son." I smiled, swallowed the pain, and let them believe I was fragile. What they didn't know was that silence was my weapon. While they laughed at me in the dining room, I was building something in the shadows, piece by piece, click by click. I wasn't planning to scream, I was planning to rise. And when the time came, they would no longer see me as the invisible wife. They would see me everywhere, on screens, in magazines, unstoppable. The first weeks in the Whitmore mansion felt like stepping into a fairy tale. Marble floors gleamed beneath my heels, chandeliers dripped crystals over endless dinners, and everyone around me seemed to smile just a little too brightly. I told myself it was a dream come true. 34, finally married to Daniel, the man who had promised me stability after years of chasing a career that had left me exhausted and broke. His mother, Helen, greeted me with soft hands and careful compliments, her lips brushing my cheek as though she were welcoming a daughter. For a moment, I believed her. I walked through rooms adorned with oil paintings and antique vases worth more than my old apartment, and I thought maybe, just maybe, I had found a place to belong. The family gatherings were elegant affairs with wine that cost more than my rent used to, and though I sometimes caught Helen's eyes narrowing at me, she would quickly mask it with a smile, her pearls catching the candlelight. Daniel stayed silent, sipping his whiskey, his hand warm against mine under the table. I convinced myself his silence meant trust, not distance. At first, I tried to mold myself into the woman they wanted. I wore the dresses Helen suggested, laughed at the family's stale jokes, and kept my past as a photographer tucked away like a secret diary. They wanted a wife who fit their mold, not someone who once crouched in dusty warehouses chasing light through cracked windows. I told myself that sacrificing a piece of me was worth the security, worth the appearance of being chosen. After all, wasn't this what every girl wanted? But perfection is a fragile glass, and mine cracked earlier than I expected. It was a Sunday afternoon. The house smelled of roasted lamb and rosemary, and the family gathered in the parlor for aperitifs. I'd gone upstairs to fetch a sweater, moving quietly so as not to disturb the delicate balance I worked so hard to maintain. That's when I heard her voice, sharp and precise like a knife slicing fruit. "She's nothing but a pretty ornament," Helen said to one of her bridge friends. "Ava has no career, no pedigree. Daniel could have done so much better." The words stopped me cold. My fingers tightened on the banister, nails biting into the polished wood. I wanted to rush down, to scream, to remind her that before I married into this gilded cage, my photographs had graced gallery walls. My name had been spoken in creative circles. But then I heard Daniel's low laugh. Not a protest, not even a word of defense, just a laugh. In that moment, the glass shattered completely. I walked back into the room, draped the sweater over my shoulders, and smiled. I laughed at a joke I hadn't heard, poured myself a drink, and met Helen's eyes without flinching. If she thought I was going to break, she was mistaken. I would not fight her with screams or accusations. I would fight her with silence, with patience, with something she could never control. That night, while the mansion settled into sleep, I sat on the floor of my dressing room with my old camera in my hands. The leather strap was frayed, the lens a little scratched, but when I held it, I remembered who I was before them. A storyteller, a creator, a woman who could capture an entire life in a single frame. I opened my laptop, signed into an account I hadn't touched in years, and began uploading. Old photographs from abandoned warehouses, portraits of strangers I'd once chased through city streets, fragments of beauty no one had seen. I didn't expect much. It was just a whisper, a silent scream into the void. 2 days later, the notification pinged. A video I'd edited, a 30-second clip of sunlight breaking through a broken church window, had gone viral. 1 million views. Comments poured in from women who said the light felt like hope. Strangers called me brilliant, haunting, unforgettable. For the first time since stepping into the Whitmore mansion, I felt seen. At dinner, Helen spoke of an upcoming charity gala. "We'll all need to look our best," she said, her gaze sliding over me like I was an accessory she might leave behind. But then, from across the table, Daniel's younger cousin pulled out her phone. "Isn't this you?" she asked, showing a video on Instagram. My face, reflected in the fractured glass, stared back at me in miniature. The table grew quiet. Helen's smile stiffened. "Some people will do anything for attention," she murmured. I bit into my bread, kept my eyes low, and let the silence swallow her words. Inside, though, my heart thundered with something dangerously close to triumph. They had seen me. The world had seen me. But Helen wasn't finished. I didn't know that while I was building my secret world online, she was already plotting her next move. She had connections. Journalists who owed her favors, friends who whispered in society's ears. She knew exactly how to twist a story. One evening, I sat scrolling through comments, smiling at strangers who thanked me for helping them feel less alone. My chest warmed, a fragile joy blooming where bitterness had been. Then the screen shifted. A notification blinked. "New article tagged with your name." I clicked. There it was in bold letters across a glossy blog. "The Gold Digger Bride: How One Woman Fooled the Whitmores." And beneath it, my photograph, one I had taken years ago, repurposed without permission, plastered with the hashtag #WashWorthlessWife. The floor seemed to tilt under me. My breath caught in my throat. They hadn't just whispered behind my back anymore. They had declared war in front of the entire world, and I realized in that crushing silence that my real battle wasn't about fitting into their world. It was about building my own, stronger, louder, and impossible to ignore. I didn't defend myself. Not once. Not when Helen's voice dripped poison at the dinner table. Not when Daniel looked away instead of meeting my eyes. I let them believe I was broken, too timid to fight back. I let them think they had won. On the outside, I was the dutiful daughter-in-law pouring tea, nodding, smiling at jokes that weren't funny. Inside, I was folding into myself, gathering the shards of who I had been before. At night, while the Whitmore mansion echoed with silence, I sat cross-legged on the floor of my dressing room. The old camera felt heavy in my lap, scarred but loyal, like an old friend who had been waiting for me. My laptop glowed faintly in the dark. I opened the account I had once abandoned, an Instagram page buried beneath years of dust. My followers had long moved on, but the photos were still there. Forgotten cityscapes, faces of strangers, moments caught between breaths. I began to edit them into short films, no longer than 30 seconds, each one pulsing with rhythm and light. I had been studying the new wave of vertical storytelling, the kind that hypnotizes viewers into watching one clip after another. I mixed in fragments of sound, a piano note here, a whispered word there, and layered it with images that lingered in the mind long after the screen went dark. These weren't posts. They were confessions disguised as art. The first clip was simple. Sunlight filtering through a shattered church window, dust motes dancing like tiny spirits. I uploaded it at 2 a.m, my heart racing. For hours, nothing happened. I almost closed the laptop and admitted defeat. But by dawn, there were 1,000 views. By noon, 100,000. By evening, 1 million. Comments flooded in. "This feels like my life. Whoever made this, thank you. I needed this. Who is she? I need more." I sat on the floor shaking as the numbers rolled upward. The world that Helen thought would mock me was embracing me. My silence had become a canvas, and the internet was listening. 2 days later, during another suffocating family dinner, I noticed something shift. Daniel's cousin, Charlotte, slid her phone across the table, screen glowing. "Ava, is this you?" she whispered. The video played on loop, my reflection caught in fractured light. The room hushed. Helen's smile twitched. "Some people will do anything for attention," she said, her tone clipped, her pearl earrings trembling as she reached for her wine. I laughed lightly, as if I didn't understand, and returned to my plate. But inside, the spark had already caught flame. While Helen dismissed me as a failed ornament, I built a world in secret. Late nights became my sanctuary. I taught myself to use AI programs to refine my work, tools that let me layer soundscapes, generate surreal textures, and amplify the emotions I wanted to carve into my audience. Each video became more daring, more visceral. I whispered lines into my microphone. They called me worthless. They thought I was invisible. But light only shines brighter when it's surrounded by darkness. People began to recognize me in cafes on the street. A stranger handed me a coffee one morning and said, "Your video saved me last night." I smiled, a real smile, not the practiced one I used for Helen. For the first time in years, I felt like myself again. Then came the email. At first, I thought it was spam. A glossy international brand wanted me to be the creative director of their new campaign. They loved my work. They wanted to use my images on billboards in New York, Paris, Tokyo. They offered me a contract worth more money than Daniel had ever shown me in his accounts. I stared at the zeros until my vision blurred. My hands trembled as I scrolled through the terms. It was real. $1 million deal. I could buy my own home, my own future. I didn't need the Whitmores. I didn't even need Daniel. I printed the contract, folded it carefully, and slipped it into the lining of my purse. At breakfast the next morning, Helen criticized the way I buttered my toast, her voice sharp as ever. Daniel read his newspaper without looking up. I simply smiled, nodded, and carried the secret like a hidden blade. Because now I knew the truth. They thought I was powerless. They believed my silence was weakness. But silence can be strategy. And when I finally spoke, my voice would echo louder than their entire mansion. That night, as I zipped my purse shut with the $1 million contract hidden inside, I caught Helen watching me from the hallway. Her eyes narrowed, her lips twitching as though she had caught a scent she couldn't quite place. She didn't say a word. She didn't need to. I realized, with a chill that ran down my spine, that she had seen the corner of the contract slip from my purse. I closed the door slowly, my heart hammering, and leaned against it in the dark. If Helen had seen what I carried, then the game had just changed. I knew Helen had seen the edge of that contract. She didn't confront me, not directly. Subtle cruelty was always her weapon of choice. But the temperature in the house shifted overnight. Her comments grew sharper, more calculated. She'd leave gossip magazines open on the kitchen counter, headlines about influencers faking success, circled in red ink. At breakfast, she sighed dramatically, telling Daniel that some people build castles on lies. I stayed quiet. I let her think she was in control. Instead, I fed the fire online. I began posting a new series of mini-films, each one sharper than the last. I told stories of women who were overlooked, dismissed, underestimated. A girl with paint-stained hands, shut out of galleries until her art spoke for itself. A waitress who dreamed of being a singer, her voice echoing in empty rooms until strangers stopped to listen. I never said these women were me, but the audience could feel the truth humming beneath the images. The comments turned into confessions. Women from all over the world wrote their stories in the captions. They shared moments of humiliation, of betrayal, of being told they weren't enough. It became bigger than me. My page was no longer just art. It was a mirror where millions saw themselves. Then one night, I posted a clip based on a suggestion from a follower in Seoul. Make a film about a queen who wears a mask to hide her cruelty. I filmed myself in the Whitmore mansion, wearing one of Helen's pearl necklaces. In the mirror, I smiled sweetly, but when I turned, the reflection twisted. My face replaced by a shadow with sharp, cruel eyes. The internet erupted. Within hours, the video was everywhere. Our Queen of Masks trended worldwide. People dissected every frame, speculating on who the queen was meant to be. Some guessed it was about toxic bosses. Others whispered it was about in-laws. But when the local tabloids picked it up, the headline screamed, "Is Ava Whitmore exposing her mother-in-law?" I watched Helen's face when she saw it. She froze, then laughed, a brittle, humorless sound. "What an imagination you have," she said to me, her smile like glass about to shatter, but her eyes burned. At the next family gathering, Helen made her move. The mansion was filled with polished guests, women dripping in diamonds, men with cufflinks heavier than my entire past life. I wore a simple black dress and stayed quiet as usual, while servers floated by with champagne. Halfway through dinner, Helen cleared her throat. "I think it's time we address the little videos," she said, her voice carrying across the table. "Ava has been spending her time playing with cameras, posting nonsense on the internet, pretending to be... what was it? An artist?" She laughed, and a few of the guests chuckled politely, unsure of the script. She turned to me. "Darling, perhaps you'd like to tell everyone what you really do all day while Daniel works." For a moment, the air grew heavy. I felt their eyes, waiting to watch me shrink. But before I could speak, Charlotte, the same cousin who had shown my video weeks ago, pulled out her phone again. "Actually," she said, voice trembling with excitement, "I think Ava's brilliant. Look!" She held up her screen, and the viral clip began to play. Gasps rippled around the table. "That's you?" one guest whispered. "I saw this. My daughter cried watching it," another said. "It was on Good Morning America this morning," someone else added. Helen's face drained of color. She tried to laugh it off. "Well, anyone can post on the internet. It doesn't mean..." But she was already losing them. The room was no longer hers. The power had shifted. For the first time, I lifted my head and looked directly at her. I didn't need to say a word. The silence between us was louder than any accusation. The victim had vanished. In her place stood someone else, someone she no longer recognized, and in that instant I saw fear flicker in her eyes. The night could have ended there, with Helen quietly stewing in her corner, but fate wasn't done with me. As the guests began to leave, Daniel placed a hand on my shoulder. "Ava," he said, his voice calm, "you need to stop this. You're embarrassing us." I froze. "Embarrassing us?" He looked at me, his jaw tight. "Mother's right. These little videos, they're just a performance. You're not an artist, Ava. You're just pretending." The words landed harder than Helen's whispers ever had, because this time they came from the man who had promised to believe in me. The chatter of the guests faded into a blur. All I could hear was his voice, echoing in my skull, each syllable cutting deeper than the last. My fingers went cold around my glass. He smiled politely at the departing guests, his arm still heavy on my shoulder as if nothing had happened. But inside me, something snapped. For years, I had believed silence was my only shield. Now I realized silence was also my sharpest sword, and Daniel had just handed me the reason to use it. I cried only once after Daniel's betrayal. Alone in my studio, tears staining the contract I had hidden for weeks, I let the weight of his words bury me, pretending. That was all I was to him. For a few hours, I felt hollow, like maybe they were right, like maybe I was nothing. But then, like fire rising from ashes, something inside me hardened. If silence had carried me this far, then fire would take me the rest of the way. I opened my laptop and sketched a plan that had been simmering in the back of my mind. I had watched new creators using immersive storytelling, augmented reality blending with the everyday. I knew I could take it further. I could make audiences feel as if my world bled into theirs. The next week, I launched my boldest project yet. I uploaded a video that appeared ordinary at first, me standing in a dimly lit room, whispering a line. They said I was worthless. But when viewers raised their phones and turned their cameras on their own walls, a shadow figure appeared behind them, whispering Helen's cruel words into their ears. Then came the transformation. Light exploded through the figure, breaking it apart until a woman's silhouette rose from the fragments, wings spreading wide across their rooms. People screamed. They cried. They replayed it over and over, filming their reactions, posting them online. It wasn't just a video, it was an invasion, a haunting, an awakening. Within hours, it went viral. Within days, it became global. Hashtags trended in languages I didn't even speak. I watched the numbers climb, the messages pour in. This saved me. I feel like I can breathe again. You don't know me, but you gave me courage. My silence had transformed into a storm, and then the twist I had been waiting for, the brand that had offered me a contract called back. They didn't just want my art, they wanted my face. They wanted me as the global ambassador for their campaign. Billboards, commercials, talk shows. My anonymity was gone, replaced by something terrifying and intoxicating. I was no longer hiding. I was stepping onto the stage the Whitmores never imagined I could claim. The morning the campaign launched, I walked through Times Square on trembling legs. My image towered above me on digital screens, my voice echoing over speakers. They called me worthless. I became priceless. For a moment, I couldn't breathe, not because I doubted, but because I finally knew I had broken free. That night, Helen's phone rang nonstop. I heard her through the thin walls of the mansion, her voice shaking as she tried to laugh. Yes, that's Ava, my daughter-in-law. Of course, we're proud. But her tone betrayed her. I knew her friends weren't congratulating her. They were mocking her. I leaned against my door, listening, a smile curling at the edges of my mouth. Helen, desperate to regain control, struck back. She called in favors from journalists, spreading rumors that I had plagiarized my work, that I was manipulative, that I had trapped Daniel into marriage. Articles sprouted like weeds, ugly and vicious. But something unexpected happened. Instead of tearing me down, her attempts backfired. Because people remembered. Screenshots of old dinner parties surfaced. Audio clips leaked of Helen's casual insults. Neighbors who had once smiled politely began sharing stories of how she'd humiliated me in front of them. Suddenly, the narrative wasn't about me at all. It was about her. Social media crowned her with a new title, America's Wicked Mother-in-Law. Memes spread faster than her rumors ever could. Teenagers edited her face into cartoon villains. Hashtags like "Mowing Stand with Ava" and "I'm Toxic Helen" dominated the feeds. For every article she paid to smear me, 10 more posts exposed her cruelty. I should have pitied her, but I didn't. Not when I remembered the nights she called me worthless, the silence Daniel wrapped me in like chains. This was justice, not pity. The final blow came during a live morning show. The hosts were discussing my campaign, showing clips of my AR video, laughing and crying with the audience. Then they cut to Helen, caught leaving a charity gala, reporters swarming. "Mrs. Whitmore, how does it feel to see your daughter-in-law becoming a global star?" a journalist shouted. Helen's smile cracked. She tried to speak, but her voice trembled. "Ava, she's always been talented," she stammered, the words bitter as ash. The footage replayed on every channel, every feed, and there it was, Helen Whitmore, stripped of her composure, caught in the wreckage of her own war. I watched from my studio, the glow of the television painting my face. For the first time in years, I felt truly alive, not because she had lost, but because I had risen. The phoenix was no longer in ashes. She was soaring. Fame has a sound. It isn't the roar of applause or the clink of champagne glasses. It's the constant vibration of a phone on the nightstand, the endless ping of emails and offers, the murmur of strangers saying your name in hushed awe. Overnight, I had become someone the world wanted a piece of. My face lit up billboards. My words echoed in conference halls. For a while, I floated on the euphoria. I had done it. I had climbed out of the ashes, wings unfurled. But success is a strange kind of cage. The more my following grew, the more people circled me. Agents, stylists, influencers who suddenly wanted to call me bestie. Invitations arrived daily, wrapped in gold foil. I smiled at the cameras, wore gowns picked by teams, and listened to compliments that felt as shallow as champagne bubbles. When the lights dimmed and the applause faded, I found myself alone in a penthouse suite, staring at the city through glass walls. I missed the raw click of my old camera in an empty alley more than I cared to admit. The media, once enchanted, began to dig deeper. Headlines shifted from praise to suspicion. Is Ava Whitmore too good to be true? Mystery artist's sudden rise raises eyebrows. They questioned my past, my credentials, even my marriage. Paparazzi swarmed outside the studio, desperate to capture me looking less than perfect. And my so-called friends, people who had once pitied me, now wanted to bask in the glow of my fame. They threw parties in my honor, but I could feel their envy clinging to me like smoke. One morning, as I was preparing for a photo shoot, my publicist burst into the room with her face pale. She handed me her phone. "You need to see this." A lawsuit. An international brand was suing me, claiming the images I'd created with AI tools were stolen. They accused me of plagiarizing their intellectual property, of using code I didn't own. The documents were official, the headlines merciless. My stomach dropped. I thought of the contract, the millions promised, the platform I had built. It could all crumble overnight. For the first time since I had picked up my camera again, fear returned, sharp and cold. What if they were right? What if everything I had built was an illusion after all? I locked myself in my hotel bathroom, scrolling through the accusations, each word heavier than the last. Fraud, manipulator, liar. The same labels Helen had whispered, now amplified by the world. My reflection in the mirror blurred, my own face unrecognizable. I wanted to scream. I wanted to run. But instead, I forced myself to breathe. I knew Helen hated me. I knew she had been plotting. But a lawsuit this precise, this brutal, it felt too calculated, too personal. And then, the final crack. A confidential email landed in my inbox, forwarded anonymously. It was a message chain between the brand's legal team and Daniel. His name, his signature, right there in black and white. He had supplied them with details about the AI software I'd used, whispered doubts about my ownership, offered them a path to destroy me. My husband, the man who once swore to protect me, the man who had held my hand at the altar. He wasn't just silent, he was the one pulling the strings. It was never Helen alone. She had been the face, the distraction. But Daniel, he was the puppet master. The realization crushed me. The man I had given everything to, my trust, my heart, my loyalty, had sold me out for power, for control, perhaps even for money. My knees buckled and I sank onto the cold tile floor. The room spun. Memories of our vows, of whispered promises in the dark, shattered like glass. I should have seen it. His silence wasn't neutrality, it was consent. His laugh at Helen's cruelty wasn't discomfort, it was complicity. And now, he had chosen his side, and it wasn't mine. That evening, I returned to the mansion for the last time. The house loomed over me, no longer a palace but a prison I was about to escape. I packed silently, every folded dress, every camera lens, every memory tucked away in suitcases. Daniel walked in, his face unreadable. "You can't just walk out," he said flatly. "Without this family, you're nothing." I paused, my hand on the handle of my bag. For once I didn't feel the need to argue. I didn't need his belief. I didn't even need his love. "I was nothing," I said softly, turning to face him. "Now I'm more than you could ever imagine." His mouth opened, but I didn't wait for a reply. I lifted my bags, walked down the grand staircase one final time, and pushed open the heavy front doors. The air outside was cold and sharp, but it tasted like freedom. Behind me, I could almost hear Helen's pearls clatter against the marble floor, her empire crumbling, her carefully polished lies exposed. And Daniel, my greatest betrayal, stood silent, as always, watching me leave. I was walking away with nothing. No jewelry, no mansion, no husband, only my name, my art, and the contract hidden in my purse. But nothing was exactly what I needed, because from nothing, I had already built a world. And now, I was ready to burn down the old one. The night I left the mansion, I carried nothing but my camera, my suitcase, and a contract that promised me independence. The city roared below my new apartment, but inside the silence was different. It wasn't Helen's silence, sharp, suffocating, laced with judgment. It was mine. Empty at first, yes, but clean. A blank canvas. For weeks, I avoided the spotlight. I declined interviews, skipped parties, ignored the flashing cameras outside my building. The lawsuit dragged on, but instead of fighting back with press releases and lawyers, I poured everything into a new project. Not content, not campaigns, something bigger. I called it Women Rising. It wasn't just about me anymore. It was a platform where women could share their stories, their bruises and triumphs, their broken glass and their phoenix flames. I opened the door for them to submit their videos, their voices, their truths. And they came. Thousands of them. Then tens of thousands. Stories from Cairo, São Paulo, Detroit, Manila. A global chorus of women who had been silenced, shamed, betrayed, and who were ready to rise. The shift was immediate. My followers weren't just an audience now, they were participants. They didn't just watch. They created, commented, collaborated. Each video was a confession, and each confession lit a torch for another woman to pick up. My AR films became canvases for their words. When someone filmed themselves with our app, their living rooms lit up with phrases like, "I am not your property," or "My silence is not your victory." For the first time, I wasn't just telling my story. I was building a world where everyone could tell theirs. But as the movement grew, so did the pressure. Sponsors demanded control. Lawyers circled, sniffing for profit. My inbox overflowed with requests from governments, corporations, celebrities who wanted to align with the cause as long as it fit their image. I could feel the same trap closing in, the same glossy cage Helen had once used to keep me small. I stood at a crossroads. If I accepted their terms, I'd be rich, powerful, untouchable. But I'd be theirs, just as I had once been Helen's. If I refused, I risked losing everything again. The night before I was to sign the final deal, I sat in front of the camera. I whispered, "What would you choose? Power or freedom?" My voice cracked, raw and human. They told me I was worthless, but you made me believe I wasn't. Do I keep climbing or do I walk away while I still belong to myself? I posted the video without edits. No music, no effects, just me, vulnerable, staring into the lens. Within hours, millions of women responded. Some begged me to take the deal, to seize the power and use it for them. Others urged me to reject it, to show the world a new way. The debate raged across platforms, trending in languages I couldn't read. Then came the moment no one expected. At a live conference, where I had been scheduled to announce my partnership, Helen appeared. Cameras swiveled toward her as she pushed through the crowd, her pearl necklace glinting under the lights. For the first time, she looked small, her hands trembling as she reached for the microphone. "I need to say something," she whispered, her voice breaking. "I was wrong. I misjudged my daughter-in-law. I let my pride turn me into someone I barely recognize." And I heard her. The room went silent. I stood frozen, every nerve in my body taut. Helen, the woman who had called me worthless, was asking for forgiveness, not in the privacy of her mansion, but in front of the world. The camera zoomed in on me. The choice hung in the air like a sword, strike her down or extend a hand. I took a breath. The fire inside me wanted vengeance, wanted to see her burn the way she had watched me burn. But another voice, quieter yet stronger, whispered, "This isn't about her. This is about you." I stepped forward, touched Helen's trembling hand, and said, "I forgive you, but I will never return." The audience erupted, not in laughter, not in mockery, but in thunderous applause. Some cried, some shouted my name. For the first time, I wasn't a pawn on someone else's board. I had broken the game. In the weeks that followed, Women Rising became unstoppable. Millions of women uploaded their stories, and the platform grew into a movement that no corporation could contain. Governments tried to co-opt it, brands tried to buy it, but I refused. We weren't a product to be sold. We were a revolution. Helen disappeared from society pages. Daniel's business faltered without his mother's connections, and the world turned its back on them. For once, their silence was the one that burned. And me? I stood in front of the camera, not as Ava Whitmore the wife, not as the worthless ornament, not even as the viral sensation. I stood as myself, scarred, reborn, unshakable. They called me worthless, I said, my voice steady, my eyes locked on the lens. I became priceless. The video went live. Millions of women raised their phones, and this time, instead of shadows, the AR filled their rooms with light. A chorus of voices rose with mine. We were no longer invisible. We were everywhere. The story should end there, with triumph, with fire, with flight. But I left one question for them. For you, if the world that once silenced you suddenly begged for your voice, would you give it to them? Or would you keep it for yourself?